Let's watch his daughter-in-law, now the grifter-in-chief at the Republican National Committee, where she steals millions for the cause of Trump's legal defense every day, assert the big lie.
What Donald Trump has said, and I think is exactly right, is that we should have free, fair, and transparent elections. And unfortunately, Eric, there are millions and millions of Americans out there who don't feel like they can trust our electoral process. We can't function as a country like that. So he said, yes, if I feel like this is a fair election, if I feel like you guys didn't interfere in any way, like they are obviously trying to do with all these bogus cases against him, then no problem. I'm happy to accept the results of the election.
Are we ready to say, Donald Trump, we are so indifferent, we care so little about this country that we make Trump its dictator? If that is the case, what a contemptible people we are. It is May the 15th, 2024. 174 days remain until the American people will decide the next American commander-in-chief. This is the warning. There is a singular feature of this dysfunctional era in American politics, and it is the inability to understand what is plainly happening all around us through the thick cordon of smoke and fog that is constantly spewed by the American media for profit, for clicks, for ratings. It is a disaster because what it has done is level the truth and the lie into an even status where they are indistinguishable from one another. And in a democracy where it is impossible to tell the lie from the truth, what is real from what is false, what is delusional and fantasy from what is true and historic, then the country will be lost, the nation, the people. And they will be at the precipice of an abyss, a disaster. This is played out all through human history. It says in Proverbs, pride cometh before the fall. Our chants of USA, USA have grown jingoistic. We unfurl giant American flags on the NFL football fields. Service members wave them for a few minutes. Maybe there'll be a squadron of fighter jets or attack helicopters overhead. Sometimes even parachutists. Navy SEALs or from the Army Golden Knights. The people cheer. But this country is founded on ideas and ideals which rose up and grew from an ember to a great light that in time lit the world. The Statue of Liberty is an enduring symbol of hope, of opportunity, of values. Most importantly, of ideals that we have not always lived up to. But in life, it is the struggle that matters. And the struggle towards these worthy goals of a just society, the one that Martin Luther King talked about, should be preeminent in a debate where everything is on the line, where there is a growing fascist menace, sustained in part by a Christian nationalist front, merged with armed militant fascist militias like the Proud Boys and the Three Percenters, both of whom have members in federal prison convicted of seditious conspiracy. It is so hard to understand what is happening in the world, what is swirling all about us, especially when the news organizations that proclaim themselves the paper of record, like the New York Times, so deliberately and purposely evade informing the public about what's happening. What is happening in the world today in America? If you were just to turn on American media, the only thing that's really happening in the world is a trial in New York City. And it is a tawdry spectacle being covered like it's the royal wedding. The anchors are there, the boots are there, but a generation later, OJ is dead, and so is the passion for wall-to-wall trial coverage. Here's what's happening in the world that really matters. The Russian spring offensive is underway. The Ukrainians are out of troops, out of reserves, out of ammunition. That's the case because the Ukrainians have been starved of the weapons, the weapon systems, the ammunition, the lethal aid that they need by the MAGA fascist Congress that fetishizes Vladimir Putin. Though the aid has recently passed, the fact that it was held up for so long means the Ukrainians are in a very tough spot with 500,000 Russian soldiers bearing down. Do you know what happened in the nation of Georgia? Do you know about the foreign agents law, which is really a way for the Kremlin to take control of civil society in a democratic nation that they already invaded? In fact, Georgia was the first nation that Vladimir Putin invaded outside of his borders in his attempt to restore the Russian Empire. Tens of thousands of Georgians are on the street fighting for democracy, fighting against the takeover through legislative process, through subversion of their nation, of their democracy by Putin's Russia. There's no word of it whatsoever on the front pages of the New York Times, which is unsurprising because its executive editor has expressed his disinterest about the issue of democracy, proclaiming it doesn't even register in the polls. The executive editor of the New York Times, who was 4 years old in 1968, declares he feels like these campus protests, which are a fringe protest, feel like 1968. It's all nonsense. And the result has properly been criticized by the legendary New York Times columnist Nick Kristof, who risked his life all over the world, from places as dangerous as the Congo, to report to Times readers about what was happening, why it was happening, trying to explicate complexity, trying to unlock the riddles of evil. Nick Kristof understands the moral and intellectual bankruptcy at hand at the New York Times. That's why he is critical of it. And another example of this ridiculousness played out in the Trump trial. It was the moment when the prosecution asked the witness, Michael Cohen, about the email exchanges between him, Trump's fixer, and the New York Times star reporter Maggie Haberman, who incredibly, though she is a subject of the trial, covers the trial as she has covered Trump, to whom she has always been conflicted because of her family's deep and long ties with the Kushner and Trump family. Maggie Haberman's coverage, its access-driven, transactional nature, has always been a journalistic obscenity. And the sum of all of it is the Times has redefined reality under a dogma of balance, which is, in fact, a delusion wrapped in an illusion to make the fascism disappear, to go away, to obliterate it from existence, though it's right in front of our faces, right in front of our eyes. Donald Trump is talking about massive prison camps to deport millions of people. He's talking about building the police state to execute that vision. He is talking about locking up political opponents and punishing them. Donald Trump is talking about deploying the military into American streets. Donald Trump has given a green light for Russia to invade Latvia, Lithuania, and Estonia, all NATO nations. He has given the Russians a green light to invade Poland, to invade Germany, to invade Moldova. Donald Trump may not be bright enough to understand this, but he's also given a green light, at least intellectually, to Xi Jinping to invade Taiwan. What Donald Trump has asserted is that right is based on might, not values. This is a world where right and wrong doesn't exist. And in a world where right and wrong doesn't exist, evil is at hand. A week ago, I documented the strange case of a Catholic bishop who became a political hitman for this man, Leonard Leo, the architect of Donald Trump's Supreme Court picks. In fact, Donald Trump allowed Leonard Leo to pick the Supreme Court nominees for him. And as a result of the power that was accrued from those choices, Leonard Leo was given $1.6 billion by a reclusive billionaire. That's enough money on the interest alone to open a new heritage foundation every year. And make no mistake, Leonard Leo is an extremist who wants to subvert not just the American Constitution, but the concepts of the separation of church and state and the checks and balances. He is the leading edge of Project 2025, a key organizer, a key funder in the effort to dismantle the American civil service. But you will read about none of this in the New York Times on a daily basis. It is invisible. The story of the century isn't even happening, though it is, today and everywhere, all at once. 9 years ago, Donald Trump came down an escalator in Trump Tower. He has been the nominee of the Republican Party for 3 consecutive elections. He has turned that party away from fidelity to the American Constitution, away from belief in election outcomes, away from belief in reality. He has turned it into a cult of personality. He has turned it into a dangerous instrument of fascism. He has turned it into an illiberal force. He has turned it into a domestic enemy, menacing the nation that it is obligated to be fidelitous towards. What Donald Trump has become is the great danger the founders warned us all about, and it is been rendered invisible. What the New York Times is and has become is a great stealth machine, cloaking the obscenities, the insanities, the dangers under a delusional architecture of balance that purports to say that the most immoral causes has to be weighed in the balance against the most moral. This obliteration of all standards, of all values, of all decency is very, very dangerous in a menacing world. Not so long ago, if the Speaker of the United States House of Representatives showed up at a criminal trial in Manhattan to put his finger on the scale, most people would have understood that that was a grotesque abuse of power. The fact that it came from a man who believed that people and dinosaurs walked around together 6,000 years ago. But again, it's difficult to know what's happening, what's coming, what's ahead. There is a reality, and it should be talked about. It's good that President Biden wants to debate Donald Trump. The president will have to win those debates. If he falls short, he risks his presidency and thus the country. And the truth of the matter is right now, Joe Biden is losing the election to Donald Trump. If the election were tomorrow, Donald Trump would be elected, which will lead to a catastrophic result. And here's the thing. 174 days away that is not being talked about, that is the most essential thing to talk about, because there is a looming catastrophe that is unavoidable. No matter the outcome of the election, there will be a catastrophe. On the one hand, should Trump be elected, he has promised to do the things he has promised to do, which again, and it can't be said enough times, he plans to dismantle the civil service and the architecture of the federal government. He has people around him talking about abolishing and banning the FBI, the Department of Justice, the Department of Education, the Department of Homeland Security, stripping everything to its bones, creating a new class of federal employee who will not swear an oath to the Constitution, but an oath of personal loyalty to Donald Trump. This is all in writing. It's real. It's called Project 2025. It's architected out of the Claremont Institute, out of the Heritage Foundation. This is what is funded by Leonard Leo. Donald Trump has promised to open mass deportation camps and to fill them, and it will require the building of a police state to do it. Donald Trump has asked the military to use force against the American people, and now he is promising to send that military, the American people's military, into the streets of America against the American people. Should he come to power, there will be catastrophe in Europe and ultimately in America. But if he loses, there will also be catastrophe, because Donald Trump and his entire party will refuse to concede the results of an election again, which they have denied and continue to deny right through to today. Let's watch his daughter-in-law, now the grifter-in-chief at the Republican National Committee, where she steals millions for the cause of Trump's legal defense every day, assert the big lie.
What Donald Trump has said, and I think is exactly right, is that we should have free, fair, and transparent elections. And unfortunately, Eric, there are millions and millions of Americans out there who don't feel like they can trust our electoral process. We can't function as a country like that. So he said, yes, if I feel like this is a fair election, if I feel like you guys didn't interfere in any way, like they are obviously trying to do with all these bogus cases against him, then no problem. I'm happy to accept the results of the election.
You see, it's not votes that decide elections anymore. It's the feeling of the candidate. I've sat in a lot of rooms on election nights, have won elections and been involved in losing elections, but never, ever was the outcome of the election determined by the feeling of the candidate. This is insanity and dangerous nonsense. These vanities, this egotism must be talked about so it can be defeated. And there is a reality at this moment in time. The New York Times poll bears this out. All of the polling bears this out in the swing states. And it's this, that Joe Biden is losing the election. And there will never be a day over the next 174 where the American people suddenly snap in, whether it's July 18th in the imagination, August 3rd, September 22nd, or whatever, where they say, oh, have you heard about the CHIPS Act? What about the infrastructure bill? Oh my, now I'm for Joe Biden. This is a delusion. It's not real. It's spoon-fed bullshit. And it numbs the American people to the danger at hand, which is the very real possibility that Donald Trump could win this election. And one of the primary reasons for that is the massive communications deficit that exists. It exists behind the presidential seal with the president. It exists with the vice president of the United States. Let's watch.
Sometimes people will open the door for you and leave it open. Sometimes they won't. And then you need to kick that door down. Excuse my language.
And it exists from behind the White House press podium. There is a fundamental inability to communicate. And the result of that failure has been devastating. A wave of lies has washed over this White House, and they have been undefended from it. They have been unable to fight back from it. They have been crushed by it. And so even when an AP reporter makes up a number of 80 to 100,000 people ludicrously, the Biden campaign's communication operation can't handle it. They are overwhelmed by the misinformation all the time. And inside the polling numbers, the devastation is clear. The Biden coalition has been liquefied. It is gone. And there is not enough time, there is not enough money to rebuild it. The coalition that matters in American politics right now is the coalition to stop Donald Trump from taking power. And that is different than a pro-Biden coalition built around his legislative accomplishments, which most people don't know about, don't care about, and don't think much about. That's the truth, harsh though it may be. Donald Trump, on the other hand, is a fascist and a dangerous maniac, a serial abuser, a liar, and somebody who can never be trusted with political power again, who will cause chaos and disaster in the world, who will strip away rights from women, from Black people, from Hispanics, who will try to lock up people with brown skin and will seek to use the power of the state to crush dissent and to punish his opponents. And it must be opposed. It must be stopped. It must be confronted, and it must be accepted as the threat that it is. There are 174 days left, and there's a lot happening in the world today. But you know where you won't see it? You know where you won't read about it? You won't see it on TV, and you won't see it in the newspapers, because so much of that space is filled with, well, bullshit. Weapons grade bullshit aimed, in the end, at all of our collective peace, prosperity, lives, liberty, and our pursuit of happiness. There is much on the line and a lot happening in the world. You can figure it out. You can find your way to it. In the end, great question at hand is coming down the pike. And it's this: are we ready to say, Donald Trump, we are so indifferent, we care so little about this country, that we make Trump its dictator? If that is the case, what a contemptible people we are. I'm Steve Schmidt. This is The Warning, and I invite you to subscribe on our Substack, on our YouTube channel. Follow us. Welcome to the community.